When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Today, we're very excited to have with us Liz Kitchens, who is the author of the recently published book, Be Brave, Lose the Beige, which Janet and I have both been happily reading. Liz has been a speaker, a consultant. She's been a pollster, so she has some actual data on some of the things that we'll be talking about and some of the things that she's talked about in her book. And we believe that this is going to be a fun conversation, so stick around. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you. I am, as you said, Liz Kitchens, and I am oldish as well. I think at 71, I certainly qualify.
Yes. They're actually the same age. You mentioned in your book being born in 1953, and so was I.
When's your birth month?
June.
Oh, July.
All right.
We're soon to be 72.
Might have the same sign.
No, we don't. Because I'm Gemini, so you must be Cancer, I think. Or else you're a Leo.
No, definitely a water sign.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Leshy.
And I'm an air sign, just kind of floating around and, you know.
I'm an air sign wannabe. But thank you so much for inviting me to be on your delightful show. I was just listening to your most recent podcast on, I think it was The Oldish Man by the Hemingway book. Oldish Man
Old
by
Man
the Sea.
and the Sea.
But it was Oldish Man, which I liked. I liked that better, especially since he actually died younger. So he was not even oldish, probably. But so I so enjoy your messages and what you communicate to the same age cohort that I care about.
One thing that struck me reading your book is how much you are in your book talking about the things that matter so much to us also. And I'm sure to many, many aging people around the country and the world. We do have listeners from all over the world, and we have these universal experiences of what is it like to be moving in our age. And so much has been studied and looked at around different developmental milestones, including up to middle age and then old age. And that is one thing Greg and I talked about as we were planning to start this podcast was, well, what's there in the middle? Because we're kind of there in the middle. We're not middle-aged anymore, and we don't really feel old. So what would that be?
Well, that's so funny because kind of the genesis of this book that I wrote is a blog I started writing when I was 56. And I kind of saw it as a lifeboat. I was getting an empty nest, and then my kids boomeranged back to the nest under just terrible circumstances. And so I started writing this blog as a way to process the feelings that I had, because of course we're parents and we have to be most attentive to them. But so what was I feeling about all this? And so then as I started writing my blog, and I called it Be Brave, Lose the Beige, mainly, I'm a color fanatic, but it wasn't just that. I wanted to use color as kind of a Trojan horse, if you may, to access, hard issues that we face. And I wanted other people to know they weren't alone in feeling like this. And I Greg and I were talking earlier about how we didn't feel like the resources that were out there at the time were all that helpful, or the models like our parents. My parents were certainly not as involved as I and my husband have been with our adult children, and being 911 on their children's cell phones as they're in their 40s. It just doesn't go away. And I like it. We like it. But accompanying that journey is the need to set some boundaries because, we're getting any younger. And so the things they expect of us sometimes aren't that realistic, including financially. My kids, I know, rub their hands together, get out the credit card, Mom's coming to town. That was the origins kind of this book. And then I know you said you started your podcast during the pandemic, and that's when I chose to write my book, and pulling from some of my blog posts and trying to organize them into a story. Because I think stories are a better way to reach people than hard facts and figures and dry language. And you do conversations, I wrote stories. And I think that's how you can have such an impact with people, or especially if you're honest and candid, people jump into your lap. It's like, thank you. I feel the same way. But I think my new resolution is not to be friends with anybody who's not honest about their kids, about their health, about things that really matter.
Yeah, I can definitely say as a psychotherapist that I believe very strongly in that as the foundation for everything. Foundation for your relationship with your partner, with your kids, with yourself. Let's just start there. And with our relationship with aging, to be able to be honest. And so your book helps bring that honesty paired with, does the honesty mean let's just sit and wait for our eventual demise? One of the things you talked about in your book a lot, one of the themes I think was creativity. And where did that come from for you? And how did that blossom for you?
Thank you. Don't let me get off track here, but since we are this age, the trail behind us is filled with a lot of hats that we've worn. And one of the hats that I had the privilege of wearing for a long time was director of a program called the Jeremiah Project. It was an Old Testament reference about going down to the potter's house. The program was housed in a congregational church in Winter Park, Florida, but it wasn't religious. And I was a potter. And so I wanted to work with underserved middle school kids in the Central Florida community and teaching them pottery, because middle school and art is just such a hard thing. They just don't offer those kinds of things. And I just knew from personal experience how powerful it was. And so this program ran for about 18 years, and we worked mainly with boys and girls clubs in Central Florida. And it was through these really brave kids who were brave enough to get in a van and come to a strange church and to agree to make something out of nothing. And they were like, I don't know what to make. I don't know what to make. And it's just like, do one thing, and that one thing will tell you what to do next. And I saw it over and over again with these kids as they made their cereal bowls or sculpted a clay dragon. One step told them what to do next. And so I kind of extrapolated from that and thought it could be applied. That same concept could be applied to the aging process, that it wasn't so much creativity as creative thinking. And because all the studies, I've been to many symposiums and researched a lot on creativity. And these studies confirm that 45 minutes of creating art, it lowers the cortisol. You know this, you're a therapist. You probably prescribe some of these kinds of things for your patients, but it lowers cortisol levels. It helps with balance. You taking fewer medications. It helps with social cohesion. the World Health Organization or Johns Hopkins Brain Science Institute have really studied this. And, I'm in Orlando, but the University of Florida has a College of Arts and Medicine. And they even study social prescriptions where a prescription is given to the patient to behold or create art. And that practice, social prescribing, is in like 32 countries in the world. And it's I don't think United States is going to be one for a while, but maybe in individual communities. I'm sure insurance companies wouldn't like that, but it's very powerful for the maker of the art, regardless of their skill level. But it's convincing them because somehow once we're past the age of 10, our creative muscles kind of start to atrophy because we don't engage them enough. So I run programs that I call Exercise Your Creativity at a wellness center near our home. And it's kind of become a third leg of fitness there, that they offer physical fitness programs, academic and book clubs. It's a kind of program to enrich your mind. And they recognize that exercising your creative muscles is really good for you. I call myself a creativity evangelist because I see its transformation possibilities. But in these sessions, especially initially, I'll have grown women jump up and want to leave the room saying, I'm not creative at all. I'll just go read a book. And it just hurts my heart because there's a fit for everybody.
They were told that. That's when I was reading your book and thinking about the benefits of this exercising your creativity when you get older. I was thinking back to when we were kids, there was physical activity, and there was a thing that was said to us, which is you should be a lifelong exerciser. So you should do your calisthenics and you should stay physically fit for the rest of your life. There was a lifelong learner, but by the time you were 10, if you weren't good at drawing, people were telling you that you weren't creative.
Yes.
So there wasn't a lifelong creativity. We weren't taught that. And also we were taught, learn what you're going to do for your career when you're in high school.
Yeah.
But you're not going to have a lifelong career. You're going to have a career until you're 65. And then we don't care. So there was no talk about preparing for a second career when you get older. There was none of that. And the worst thing probably of all was there was no learn and exercise your ability to love because you're going to be a lifelong lover if you're lucky.
That's so wonderful.
We didn't know about that. We never taught anything about that.
No. My son and I have taught, I'll back up a little bit, a big fan of a Catholic theologian whose name is Richard Rohr, and he writes a lot about the first and second half of life, like you're talking about, Greg. He wasn't the first or the last. David Brooks with the New York Times has written a book called The Second Mountain. And Erik Erikson, psychologist, wrote about the stages of life. And he labeled his last stage of life as generativity versus stagnation. And my son wrote his dissertation based on that stage. And I wrote a book. But it's just finding meaning and purpose in the second half of life. In our first half of life, it's such ego and getting educated, getting a job, having children, how we look in the world, making money. And then if we're lucky enough, in so many cultures or countries don't have this luxury to ponder the second half of life. But that was another motivating factor for writing this book. It's like, how are you going to spend this time that Greg just described? And because you could live to 100. I heard that on your podcast, and it's very likely. And people coming behind us certainly will. So that's a lot of time. So I really like your take on that, Greg.
So I just want to say that we're talking to Liz Kitchens, and she wrote a book recently called Be Brave, Lose the Beige, Finding Your Sass After 60. So it's so fascinating to think about this whole creativity, generativity, continuing on throughout life, including in being oldish. I wrote down a few quotes. One of them was, creativity is about living a life driven more strongly by curiosity than fear. And actually, you'd included that in your book and said it was by Elizabeth Gilbert. That really resonates with me because I feel like this time can be so full of fear.
Yeah.
What is happening next? My body is going to age. How is it going to age? And what is my future in so many ways, time-wise, and what I'm capable of. And so to be able to think about creativity is about living a life driven more strongly by curiosity than fear sounds so right.
John Baptiste's wife, whose name I can't remember or pronounce, but wrote a book about how we strive for some perfect state of wellness and how frustrating that can be if you don't achieve it. And that is my main complaint, because we are going to face scary things. I have a dear friend who, I think we're about to lose him, and it's ugly. What he's going through is not attractive, and it's painful. But I've been talking to him about finding any light in the darkness. Just try not to be totally define this time by its pain. I think that's all we can hope for, is that's how you have control in situations where you don't have control. I am singing to the choir with you, Doctor, but I just see it. And if you can interject even a little bit of lightness, and as you were both talking about creativity and how it's undersold to us once we get a little bit older, the exercising is really more. You can't just say, okay, I agree with this. Once this podcast is over and somebody says, I think this is a good idea, I'm gonna do this. It's hard to snap your fingers. You have to kind of work at it, just like learning to meditate. You still have to practice it. And it doesn't matter how you practice it, but if you have that practice and that discipline, then you start seeing little glimmers of, I know I have this going on, but I could do this kind of yes and thinking. It's so good for us.
Yes, I agree. And what you were saying about how the way we think can impact how we experience this time in our life. You mentioned meditation. Greg and I are both meditators. The idea of meditation or some kind of mindfulness. So all three of us. And there was some research that was done. It took a group of older people and they were meditating every day. And it took a group of older people who were not meditating, oldish, and followed them. And as they had physical ailments and pain and illness, that the people who had been meditating actually experienced that pain to a lesser degree than the people who had not been meditating and had some of the same illnesses.
Wow.
And I think part of it is that being able to look at this moment and this life and this time as with joy, with creativity, with thankfulness, with gratitude.
I think that's the meaning of life. But if you can boil it down, it's being present. And I think that is what, as you're saying, meditation, engaging in a creative act makes you sit your butt down and puts you in the present moment. And it gives you really, just like with meditation, because I'm a meditator too, a mental spa. And so that, of course, helps you cope if your mind is refreshed, even a little. And coping, that's what you hope for, is when a loved one's going through something or you are going through something yourself. My son was kicked out of college on the first day for smoking pot and sent home. And my daughter was dating somebody we thought was a terrorist. This was all around 9/11. And so the Jeremiah Project was such a diversion, as was the writing. I mean, it just really helps, because otherwise you can get mired into, our kids, we're crazy about our kids and we're very involved in their lives, maybe to our detriment sometimes. And So doing something for yourself, and women are historically very bad at this, about choosing to do something for themselves. And I want more for women, but we're complicated. I think one of the fun parts of creative thinking is breaking fine print rules, saying yes when everybody else says no. The society loves to say no. I kind of did a spoof in my introduction to the book about, which I'd be happy to read if you want me to. It's just a paragraph, but
Sure.
okay. Let me see where it is. It's called An Ode to Beige. Meet Beige. Beige is reliable, practical, sensible, and safe. Beige doesn't put up a fuss. It is very accommodating and goes with everything. Beige is conflict averse, follows the rules, blends in, and avoids standing out. Now meet Magenta. Magenta and her sister jewel tones are rich, dynamic, loud, sometimes garish, and not easily overlooked. Magenta doesn't always mix well with others. Magenta is hard to ignore. Beige is endorsed, even encouraged by our society. Governing bodies prefer their citizens in beige. Too many screaming magentas and shrieking yellows, and there's trouble in River City, or so we're told. But maybe some rebellion is warranted at this stage in our lives. The biggest danger intrinsic to being beige is that it precludes creative thinking. Armed with a beige brush, our purses and sofas aren't the only items we color vanilla. We also tend to beige up our choices, goals, and life strategies. So it's breaking these little rules. And I think rules are different than laws. And I think, now not just women, but I think women have lived a good portion of their lives, especially women my age, within the confines of some authority figure or another. Parents, bosses, my gosh, our children. My son bosses me around all the time and thinks he knows best. And the problem with that is we internalize those admonitions or whatever and think of them as laws, and they're not. And so getting ourselves out of that mindset is really important. They're not laws. They're fine print rules. In the book, I talk about breaking my husband out of the hospital because he was just sitting there. And I was really safe with him. A friend of mine had a heart attack over that story, but it was fine. I wasn't breaking a law. To be able to discern the difference, I think, is also something that by now I think we've gotten better at. So that's my take on creative thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking, the picture went through my head when you were reading your little piece that had the magentas in it. I'm thinking about all the pictures that I've seen and the videos that I've seen in the last month of millions of people gathering along roads and in town squares and in the big streets in the big cities carrying signs. And if you look at the pictures very quickly, there's not much beige in those pictures.
I know. It's art. Are you kidding? It's art. I'm so thrilled with these. I've got a collection of them. They're very artful. And we're all, so many of us are so frustrated that it's just like aging. You want to be able, if we feel helpless. And that is empowering in any way, because this is a scary time.
Yeah, so go do it. Put on a colorful jacket and go out in the rain and carry a sign.
That's right. Well, the signs are awesome. I mean, they're really, really good.
Talk about creative.
Yes. Yeah, they're just like pouring themselves. I am thrilled about that. I wish it could have more effect.
Yes.
Maybe it will.
Well, I think it definitely will. There's There's no doubt about that, because if nothing else, the oligarchs are oligarchs of consumerism. And if the consumers are in the streets saying, no, we won't,
It's true.
if those consumers are in the streets saying, I'm not buying anything on Amazon anymore.
I'm not buying a Tesla.
No Teslas for me. Thank you very much. 5 years ago, I was like, oh, I want a Tesla.
I
But
know.
no Teslas for me. Not a
I
chance.
know.
No Facebook. I'm not looking at the ads on Facebook anymore. None of that. So those people will notice when the consumers go away, because they don't remember that their wealth is based on we continue to buy stuff.
I another hat I have is pollster. My husband and I have had a market research firm working with Democrats and progressive causes for way long. So I've done a lot of research over the years about this age category, women, baby boomer women, lady boomers, as I like to call us. And I've been curious about the current situation. And so if you'd like me to share any of that data, it's women over 50. It was a national survey we conducted. It was about all kinds of things, but we did add some political questions.
Do you want to share what some of the highlights were of what you found or what stuck out to you?
Well, I think there was a poignant part to me, and that is financially. It's like 33% of women in this age category are just meeting their basic living expenses or forced to live with other family members because they can afford to live on their own. That's a high percentage of people. And equally, they're afraid of whether they're going to be able to have enough money or resources in their retirement years. Like 35%, they're in a crisis of confidence that they're going to not have enough money. One of the things I asked was, we have 37% who are either relying entirely on Social Security or aren't having any plans of retiring until they absolutely have to, or will have to live with their children. That's high numbers.
Yes.
And then the other thing that I found really interesting was, I was curious. The question was, how beneficial do you think it would be for the country if a woman was elected president of the United States? And overall, I mean, it's pretty good. 62% say they think it's really good. And we did not put any Democratic or Republican labels on this. We really tried to be very neutral in the way we designed the questions. But 81% of Democratic women are enthusiastic about the prospect, while only 34% of Republican women are. And so it made me think about Nikki Haley, for example, getting through a Republican primary. This is like the proverbial wrinkle in the political ointment. But when I compared these results to the financials, this is not shocking, but the correlation between income and education and progressive views correlated. And lower income, less education, and more traditional views about social issues correlated. And so it's just like you're voting against your own self-interest. We're trying to do away with the Department of Education is really a bad idea, because the correlation is so clear between income and education levels. And it breaks my heart. So that's my takeaway, is it breaks my heart, or the message just hasn't been about how the financial insecurity that so many, this is just women over 50, but we did a 720 interview sample, and it balanced on all the known demographic factors, but it just really kind of pulled my heartstrings to see these results. So these are people, and they're voting against their own self-interest.
A lot of that doesn't make any sense, voting against the self-interest. And the reason that there is Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid is that a significant percentage of people don't have enough to survive a major bump or a long life. And so
Yes.
we owe that. Not only we owe it, but we paid for Social Security. They keep using the word entitlement. It's not an entitlement other than that. Of course, I'm entitled to it. I paid for it. The same with Medicare and with Medicaid and the Department of Education. But there's room in there for the people who are opposed to that, who want to keep more of the money rather than share it and live in a community where people aren't starving to death. So they twist the narrative a little bit. So get rid of the Department of Education because we can't let these people teach our children that they're going to be trans when they grow up or that slavery was bad or any of that. But the Federal Department of Education does nothing about curriculum. They say nothing about curriculum. It's all about providing support for people who couldn't get whatever education is offered in their local community otherwise. So they twist the narrative around that. The Federal Department of Education is not setting curriculum. That's all set at the local level. Most states don't even, other than saying, well, you're not getting out of high school in this state unless you can pass this math test. Most states aren't even defining the curriculum. It's done on the more local level. So if you want to live in a town where people are saying trans is
That's a
bad,
good point.
slavery is good, then go live there. That's fine. But if you have a child who needs to get to school in a wheelchair, you can't go live there if there's no Federal Department of Education because that local school department can't necessarily afford that accommodation on their own. That's what they do. And the Department of Education provides student loans for people that go to college who can't afford it otherwise.
That's right.
So
That's right.
there's a whole lot of people that fit that category that come out the other side doing really well and helping our stories from back when I was in the education business in Maine, where people were saying we have to cut the school budget. And somebody who was a doctor in the community went to the school board and said, no, we don't want to cut the school budget. We want to increase the school budget. I don't want to live in a town full of stupid people.
Just saying.
That's right.
Why do you want that?
Is
So it goes back to Nixon and the pointy-headed intellectuals. This argument has gone on forever, and they just don't understand the systems that create. I mean, it's a system. It's like an ecosystem. It is an ecosystem. They don't understand birds dying affects this too. They just don't or refuse to see this is the sustain. And that anyway makes me.
That expression that you just expressed, where you shook your head and said, well, anyway, I think that's the most common thing that people who are oldish are saying these days. Because, you get to a point, it's like, well, I don't get it. I personally don't understand how people don't see what's happening and say, wait a minute, that's not America. Well, I was thinking about this the other day when we were in elementary school and high school. One of the proudest things that I remember my parents saying was, we live in a melting pot.
That's so nice.
And suddenly the melting pot has become these horrible people from overseas who are taking our jobs and raping our children or whatever. And none of that, not none, but 99% of the bad part isn't true.
Oh, studies. I have a family member who thinks that way. And I said, Jim and I are in the data business and we believe in the preponderance of the evidence. Most of the science field says this and most of it says this, but they somehow don't need preponderance of the evidence to have their views. And that is frustrating. That is really frustrating.
It's usually something that they heard somewhere that they were told. I had big arguments with my sister before she passed away. What she was upset was immigrants. And I said, well, what's with the immigrants that you're upset about? Our grandfather, father's father, was a refugee. So I said to her, Kathy, what's the issue with immigrants? And she said, well, they're coming here and taking our jobs. I said, Kathy, you've been retired for 10 years. They're not taking your job. What are you upset about?
See, I'm not good at that. I don't fight well. I don't spar well.
Well, I didn't win. She died believing that Donald Trump was a great man and would save America.
Oh,
So
God.
I didn't win, but well, at least had the opportunity to say it.
Well, it kind
Yes.
of goes back to one of the things you wrote in your book, Liz, about all of this, I think is appropriate in this moment. It says, you wrote, so creative thinking is an excellent partner in the quest to retain control while navigating this aging journey. That really touched me because there's so much we don't have control over: politics, changes, decisions, the way some of our family members are thinking in spite of the evidence. We don't have control over so much, but creative thinking, which we can think of in this context too. How do you think creatively about what's going on? Whether that includes creating a wonderful poster that you bring with you to
Yes.
the protest. And creative thinking is an excellent partner in our quest to retain some control while navigating this aging journey.
Wow. Thank you for hearing that. I really are feeling that way because I think it keeps it, along with keeping us physically healthy, keeping us sane. And I do think if we at least, like talking to you guys today, I'm going to be good for the rest of the day. Not just because we seem to be kindred spirits in the political realm, but you're spending your time and energy on a podcast once a week. And I know as a writer what goes into that kind of preparation, finding people to interview. It's hard. I mean, you are doing something really hard. And it gives you guys, I'm sure, lots of stimulation and joy.
Yes.
And you're making the world a better place. And so, and that's part of this generativity thing, is leaving the world a better place.
Yes.
And I think we can't give up on those goals. And even if we are in kind of a toxic political time, to put this conversation out into the ether, or something, to writing something into the ether, that positive stuff, we've got to mix in and hopefully do some good. Maybe we're not as helpless as we might think. Talking with you guys is helping me see some of this, and I am very grateful for this conversation. And I hope your listeners are, for what you give them. It's a reframe. You're a psychologist. It's a reframe. We have to reframe.
Exactly, which is what your book is doing also. Another quote, and I'm adding some of these quotes just to give our listeners a flavor for what they can find in your book and are thinking about being oldish. And you talked some about transitions, as you mentioned with Eric Erickson, the transitions we have through our lifetime and now in our aging and our oldishness. And you wrote, how we occupy the space of the transitions determines whether our lives will be enriched by them or diminished. That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a humanities major, and the pre-Socratic philosophers said, do what you can with what you've got where you are. Sounds very simple, and it's not, but it's kind of true.
Yes. Yes.
That's all you got. If it's whatever your financial plight is, that's what we have to do.
What is your time like in this oldishness? You have written a book about it. You think about it. You gather polls, information. It's been part of your life for so long as far as creativity. What is it actually like for you as far as, we try to be positive and try to look for creativity and the fun moments and being able to have some control in this time of feeling not much control. Does that buoy you, hold you? Is it a roller coaster for you? What is it like for you?
Thank you for that question. That's been lovely. My Myers-Briggs profile says, gosh, I feel like I'm just talking about myself. It says that I'm a minister. And I like that because I'm not a teacher, even though we run my partner and I run these exercise or creativity classes. we just provide a space. We want a sacred, safe space where people can come, and we encourage the heck out of them. And it's just the process. It's the doing. And so for me, I think writing my blogs, I'm trying to get more publications. I submit my essays that I write. I like writing in first person. I don't know what I think half the time until I write it down. And then people will come up to me if they're a blog subscriber, they've read my book, and they are so nice and say that it has touched them in a way. Now, they're, of course, my demographic. I don't have many men come up to me, Greg, saying anything, and that it resonates. And that is so meaningful to me. It's not really about me. It's almost like if there is a God message, that would be what I'd hope, that somehow a truth of mine can help somebody else. I know you are that way because that's your field. This is a new field for me, really, but just using color and art and words to achieve that, to help people who are, it's hard out there.
Yeah.
Letting your magenta self out. I do want to correct you on one thing that you said, Liz, which is you just said a few minutes ago that you're not a teacher. You just create a space and an opening and an opportunity for people to explore whatever it is that they were learning or their creativity. That's the definition of a good teacher.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Maybe I don't like the preachy part. It's like it has to be my way. I'm not good at.
There are two different kinds of teachers. One is the traditional one that we grew up with you can call the sage on the stage. I know all this stuff. I'm going to say it to you out loud. If you repeat it back to me on the test, you'll pass, right? Or there's another style of teacher, which is a guide on the side. I'm here with you. I'm going to help you create a space to do the stuff in, and I'll be here to help you reflect on what you're doing. But it's not up to me to be in charge of what you're going to learn.
What was your role in the education field?
I got involved in educational technology as an adult because my children, when they got to high school, would come home, we'd say, how was school? And they'd say the same crap I did when I came home from school. And I said, well, this can't be right. So I got involved in educational technology. I went and got myself a degree as an adult.
Wow.
One of the things that features prominently in your book is gummies and the use of cannabinoids. And so I often say that I went to college in 1968, and I majored in recreational pharmaceuticals. And I was so good at it that by 1969, the school said, okay, you can leave now. And so that's what happened. And by the time I got to my 40s,
you and my son.
But when I got to my 40s, I needed a change. I needed a way to go to a job interview and say, yes, I do have a degree. So I went back and did an adult degree program and then invented a degree in computers and education. This was in the early 90s.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
Those are the stories that you guys share with people. And it's like, even if they wanted to go back to, there's so many continuing education classes that are so available for a reasonable price now for seeing, get a degree now. Mm-hmm. It's now, that's what I kept telling myself. It was like, as it took forever to get published, and there was such a process, and my editor was just torturous. But I kept saying to myself, if I don't do it now, 2 years from now, it won't be done either. And it's the same thing with a degree. Just do it. Those stories are very inspirational to people. Do it.
Yes.
I want people to be tortured. They torture themselves by not having a degree. Intelligent people who just never did it, and it's hanging over their heads. And it's not easy, of course. They don't give those things away.
So a couple of things before we run away is we frequently ask our guests 2 questions as we get toward the end. You can answer these or not. You can say, I don't want to answer these questions. In this whatever order you choose. One is, in your oldishness, what are you afraid of? And in your oldishness, what excites you?
That's a good question. I'm reading a wonderful book called, I think it's Freshwater for Flowers. It's a novel and it's just exquisite. And it takes place in a cemetery. But I've been thinking, because they deal with death. And I think what I'm afraid of is losing my husband. That he's my touchstone. I dedicated my book to him. He is the scaffolding for all my dreams. He just believes in me. It's so nice to have somebody believe in you. And I didn't have that in the first marriage. And I got really in a lot of trouble by having a subchapter in my book called Dump the Dude. It's really about my former. But it's not a bad guy, or getting to the point where the ugliness of an illness, where you're such a burden, that probably does frighten me. I'm so excited right now because my kids live outside Chicago in Evanston, and I have 2 grandchildren up there. And so this year we're renting a place up there for 3 months toward the end of summer and into fall. So getting to experience a place I love so much. I just love Chicago. It's the most exciting city. I see being near an urban area like that just is exciting me, and using that as a launching place to kind of discover some national parks and travel around and get to be a part of my grandchildren's lives instead of just on FaceTime. I don't think I would have said that to you a year ago. I would have said writing is and all that kind of stuff. But having new experiences, starting something new, I think is exciting. We'll be in a 1-bedroom apartment as opposed to a 3-bedroom townhouse. But so what? So you just adapt, and it helps you be flexible, and you might have to, we'll be out of our comfort zone. And I think that's healthy.
It is healthy, and being creative.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. It's kind of simple, but those 2 things I think are where I'm at right now. Thank you for those very thoughtful questions. You've given me a lot to think about today, which I love. Your counseling session is wonderful.
I'm glad to hear that. So I think we are out of time as far as just wanting to thank you, Liz, so much. Liz Kitchens, be brave, lose the beige, finding your sass after 60. So wish you the best in your ongoing finding your sass, holding on to your sass, finding new ways and creative ways to be sassy.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I am just delighted to have been here and to have shared this very meaningful hour with you both. And I appreciate your own ministry.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun for me. Every time we have a conversation with somebody, I say, I want to hang out with that person. It's fun getting to know somebody, and it's fun getting to know people who are thinking about things and feeling things and are open to still being alive, which is what I think of as the key features of oldishness.
I am now a big fan of Oldish.
Wish you the best in
Thank you so
today,
much.
tomorrow, and all that life brings you.
And you too. Thank you for
Thank you.
inviting me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Liz. Bye, Janet. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We had a great time reading Liz Kitchens' important book, Be Brave, Lose the Beige, and loved our lively conversation with her. We learned a lot and hope you did too. You can buy Liz's book on her website at your local bookstore or on our Oldish bookstore in bookshop.org. If you buy a book from our store on Bookshop, you get a small commission, and Bookshop will send a portion of the sale price to an independent bookstore of your choice. A winner all around. Links in the show notes. We met Liz after she left a very nice review on our website at www.oldish.me. You can too. If you'd like to support Oldish, there's a link on our website where you can leave a one-time or recurring donation to help offset our costs. Our next episodes will include a conversation with Carol Rems, author of Best Sex Ever After Menopause. It may change your life. Also, we are working on an Oldish book club including the Decades series of poems by Judith Viorst. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.